Welcome back to this series through the Old Testament. In today's episode, Ozzy will guide us through the story where Isaac's wife and son work to deceive him for the patriarchal blessing.
Generations in the future from our story this morning, we are going to see the children of Israel, and God, in a powerful, amazing way, delivers them from bondage in Egypt. Through signs and miracles and wonders, He's going to lead them out. And they're the children of Israel. And some of them are going to grumble and complain and say to Moses, "Was it not because there were not enough graves in Egypt that you led us out?" And then God is going to lead them to the promised land. And they're going to turn around and go the other way and not have the faith to enter the land. And then they're going to be out in the wilderness, and they are going to be fed by God's own hand, the manna. And they are going to grumble and complain. And in Romans chapter 2, Paul, not only drawing on his own generation, not only drawing on his own experience, but looking back through Scripture. In Romans chapter 2, he's going to write that the sign of the covenant, circumcision, is not merely outward. And there's a circumcision of the heart. And then in chapter 9 of Romans, he's also going to say that although they're Israel, they're not all Israel. And I think that Paul, at least in certain places, has some of our story in mind this morning as he draws that powerful story. And I wanted that idea at the forefront of our mind as we look at the stories that we are going to engage this morning. Now, as I previewed last week, Isaac is a little bit of a transitional character. He is important there at the end of the Abrahamic narratives, and he's important at the beginning of the Jacob narrative, but he himself only gets a handful of narratives, and I find that a little bit sad. Isaac is the child of promise, and he marries Rebeca, and we see the hand of God in that story, and Rebeca is barren. And Rebecca's barrenness reminds us of Sarah's barrenness. And God spoke to Abraham, and He promised him the land, and He promised him blessing, but He also promised to make him a great nation, and his descendants would be as numerous as the stars up in the heavens, or as numerous as the sand along the seashore. And that's not going to come through Ishmael, and that's not going to come through the children of Abraham's second wife after Sarah dies. It's going to come through Isaac. But Rebekah is barren. And that's a little bit of an obstacle if we're going to have offspring. Maybe Isaac learned a lesson. Maybe Dad passed on to him. I know what you're thinking. Don't do it. And Isaac doesn't take a second wife. He doesn't take a concubine. Instead, he prays. He prays to God, and God allows Rebekah to conceive. And the babies inside of her jostle each other. And she takes this as an omen. And she inquires of the Lord, and the Lord speaks and says, there are two nations inside of you. And the older will serve the younger, which is countercultural. And I have so many questions about that story. Because it says that she inquires of the Lord, but it doesn't tell us how she did that. Did she go to a prophet? We don't know. This is during the patriarchal days, so there's no temple, there's no tabernacle, and whatever the Urim and Thummim are in the future, they're not there. So we don't know how she inquires of the Lord. During the patriarchal times, it's possible that the patriarchs themselves, God speaks to Abraham, God speaks to Isaac, God speaks to Jacob. It's possible that it's through Isaac that she inquires of the Lord. But that raises a great question, because God says the older will serve the younger. But here in a moment, we're going to get to Isaac trying to give the blessing to the older and not to the younger. Luther answered this question by saying that she went to that fellow Melchizedek we saw a few chapters ago. And maybe Luther was right, but the text doesn't tell us that. So I have questions. But this is an interesting story, is it not? That these two babies are inside the womb, and the older will serve the younger. And we see the hand of God in a way that I can't explain to you, in a way that I just don't understand. But nonetheless, it's there. The two babies are going to be born, and the younger one is going to be grasping the heel of his older brother as he emerges. And he's going to get the name Jacob, which means to grasp the heel, or it also means to trick. And that's an interesting name to give the baby, isn't it? Let's jump in to the story here. This is Genesis chapter 27, starting in verse 1. Now it came about, when Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see, that he called his older son Esau and said to him, "My son?" And he said, "Here I am." Verse 2. Isaac said, "Behold, now I am old and I do not know the day of my death. Now, please take your quiver and your bow and go out into the field and hunt game for me. And prepare a savory dish for me, such as I love, and bring it to me, that I may eat, so that my soul may bless you before I die." Rebeca was listening while Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau had went out into the field to hunt game and to bring it home, Rebeca said to her son Jacob, "Behold, I heard your father speaking to your brother Esau, saying, 'Bring me some of the game and prepare a savory dish for me, that I may eat and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death.'" Verse 8. Now therefore, my son, now therefore, Jacob, listen to me as I command you. Go now to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats, that I may prepare a savory dish for your father, such as he loves. Then you shall bring it into your father, that he may eat, and so that he may bless you before his death. Verse 11, Jacob answered his mother, Rebeca, and said, "Behold, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall be a deceiver in his sight, and I shall bring upon myself a curse and not the blessing." His mother said to him, "Your curse be upon me, my son, only obey my voice and go get them for me." So he went out and got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother made savory food such as his father loved. And Rebeca took the best garments of Esau, her elder son, which were in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And she put the skins from the young goats on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. So she gave the savory food and the bread which she had made to her son Jacob. Then Jacob came to his father and said, "My father." And Isaac said, "Here I am." "Who are you, my son?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Get up, sit, and eat my game, that you may bless me." And Isaac said to Jacob, "How is it that you have it so quickly?" And Jacob said to Isaac, "Because the Lord your God caused it that it should happen to me." Did you catch that? Verse 20, Isaac said, "My son," 21. Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come closer, that I may feel whether you are really my son Esau or not." Is Isaac suspect? So Jacob came to Isaac, his father, and he felt him. The voice is that of Jacob, but the hands are that of Esau. And he said to him, "Are you really my son Esau?" And Jacob said, "I am." Verse 25. So he said, "Bring me, and I will eat my son's game, that I may bless you." And he brought it to him, and he ate, and he brought him the wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come closer and kiss me, my son." So Jacob came closer, and Isaac kissed him and smelled the smell of his garments. And he blessed him. "See, the smell of my son is like the smell of the field which the Lord has blessed. Now may God give of the dew of heaven and the fat of the earth and an abundance of grain and new wine. May people serve and nations bow down to you. Be master over your brother, and may your mother's sons come and bow down before you. Cursed be the one who curses you, and blessed be the one who blesses you." Jacob and Rebecca have conspired together to deceive Dad. Are they right or are they wrong to do this? Now be very, very careful before you jump to the ends justifies the means. How many people have used that excuse before? And of course, just a couple chapters ago, Abraham and Sarah reasoned the ends justify the means, only to be proven wrong. And centuries in the future, Saul is going to go into the cave where David and his men are hiding. And David's men are going to say to him, "The ends justifies the means." But David says no. So here, what do we do with this story? Did you catch something very interesting, something very powerful? Isaac reasons out loud and says, "The voice is that of Jacob, but the hands are that of Esau." He's suspect. He's wondering. But he touches the goat's fur and he concludes, maybe Esau was out and about. Maybe he smelled too much pollen, and maybe his voice is scratchy or different. He smells the clothes that Isaac has on, and he concludes that it's my son Esau, and I'm going to give him the blessing. But you and I, the reader, were cued in that deception is afoot. And this is an interesting point. Isaac asks him, "Who are you?" And Jacob lies. And Isaac reasons. It takes time to get your quiver and your bow. It takes time to go out into the field and find the animal. How is it that you have it so quickly? And did you catch what Jacob did there? He said, "The Lord your God made it happen." I shared with you guys, and there might be something wrong with me. I really like those episodes. I really like those clips where somebody gets arrested. I don't know what's wrong with me. Maybe I like to think somebody else is having a worse day than I am. One of the things that happens oftentimes, I love this particular episode, a gal is busted. They've ran her name and her birth date, and she has warrants, and she tells the cop, "I pinky swear that's not me." And it's at that point, I generally don't give legal advice, but it's at this point I want to give legal advice. A pinky swear is not a legal agreement. I was sharing this episode with a former law enforcement officer, and he shared with me that once they start swearing to God, a rather irreligious person starts swearing to God, it tips them off that we probably, more likely than not, have the right person here. And Jacob, one of our patriarchs, one of our heroes, has to lie and invoke God to cover his lie. This is Jacob. Now, the deceit is going to be found out, because here shortly Esau is going to come in. He's going to cook his meal. He's going to bring it to dear old dad. And dear old dad is going to go, "Who are you? I've already eaten." And family is broken. And Esau decides in his heart, after my dad passes away, I'm going to kill my brother. We've seen that before, haven't we? So, mom tells Jacob, you got to leave. You got to get out of town. Go to my brother Laban's house. Laban, isn't he a fun character? We're going to deal with Laban next week, okay? Jacob spends 20 years at Uncle Laban's house. And you might be thinking, why are you skipping over all these details? And you're going to have to come back next week, because we're going to deal with Jacob's time with Laban and that 20-year period. But I do want to jump ahead, because there are two stories that I think are so important in the Jacob narrative to see the contrast, to see the difference in these two things. So let's skip ahead. We're going to be in chapter 32. And in chapter 31, God says, 20 years later, to Jacob, it's time to go home. Pack your bags, and it's time to go home. And on his way home, he hears Esau, the guy you ripped off, the guy you tricked, the guy you stole from. He's coming out to meet you with 400 men. And Jacob is worried. And Jacob is scared. We say time heals all wounds, but I ask you, Christian, be absolutely honest. Does time heal all wounds? But I want you to see the change that we see in Jacob. The Jacob 20 years ago was willing to deceive. He was willing to trick. He was willing to do things his way. Now, let's see the prayer that Jacob prays. This is chapter 32, and we're going to begin in verse 9. And Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your relatives, that I will prosper you. I am unworthy of all your loving kindness and of all the faithfulness which you have shown your servant. For with my staff only I crossed the Jordan, and now I've become two companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, and he has come to attack me and the mothers of my children. Verse 20, For you, God, said, I surely will prosper you and make your descendants as the sand of the seashore, which is too great to be numbered. This is a prayer of submission. This is a prayer of the deceiver and the tricker realizing there is no deceit that's going to get me out of this. There is no trick that's going to get me out of this. I need God. God, you've been with me this whole time. And we're going to look next week at how God has been with him this whole time. But now he faces an obstacle. He faces a challenge, a true threat. And he realizes, if I'm ever going to get out of this, I need you, God. How many of you have prayed a prayer like that? How many of you have gotten to a place that you realize, for all your intelligence, for all your cunning, the only way out of this is God? And now we find this fascinating, interesting episode. And I don't have time to break down all of the connections here in the passage, but let's skip down to verse 24. Jacob has sent his family on ahead of him. Verse 24. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. And isn't that an interesting way for the author to cue us in? A man wrestles with him. Verse 25, and when he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh, so that the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him. And this man said, Let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let go until you bless me. So the man said to him, What is your name? And he said, Jacob. Verse 28. And he said, Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have strived with God and men and have prevailed. And then Jacob asked him, Please tell me your name. But he said, Why is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him. And Jacob named that place Peniel. And he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved. How many of you have questions? He wrestled with God, and he says that he prevailed. What is it to wrestle with God and to win? Can you wrestle with God and win? He wrestles with this man, and this man realizes that he has to cheat. The cheater got cheated. You've got to love the irony right there. And he asks the man to bless him. What? Jacob, you have the blessing. You stole it 20 years ago. Why are you asking the man to bless you now? Did it work? Did he steal the blessing? That's a great question. And it speaks to faith. It speaks to who really can control God. Can you control God? Can Isaac control God? Can Abraham control God? Or is God free to do what God will? Even though he got the blessing from Isaac, I think he realizes that he didn't get the blessing from Isaac. The blessing needs to come from God. we see a completely different. We see a transformed. We see a Jacob who is not the same as he used to be. We see a Jacob who started this way and ended up this way. A Jacob who thought you could make a deal with God. Isn't it interesting that theme, that idea has permeated even our stories? That you can make a deal with God, or it's sometimes presented in the reverse, that you can make a deal with the devil. In fact, that's a colloquialism. That's a saying in our make a deal with the devil. But he has to wrestle with this man. And he won't let go. He holds on to him. And God asks him a question. Did you catch this? Did you see this? 20 years earlier, Isaac asked him, "Who are you?" 20 years later, the angel, God, asks him, "What is your name?" And maybe for the first time in Jacob's life, he told the truth. When Isaac asked, "Who are you?" he lied. And he said, "I'm Esau." When God wrestles with him, God asks him, "Who are you?" And he tells him the truth. "I'm Jacob." I can't lie. I can't cheat. I can't trick. I have to be honest. And we see this different Jacob. We don't see the Jacob of the past. We see a transformed and different Jacob. And we see a Jacob that now God can use. And Jacob, like Abraham, like Sarah, gets a new name. Abram to Abraham, Sarai to Sarah, Jacob to Israel. And there's so much power. There's so much symbolism. One of the great debates of the church, one of the great debates, and in fact there'll be different churches that'll answer this question differently. How do you get faith? How does it happen? Some churches, mom and dad take you as a little baby to the church, and they baptize you as a little baby. And mom and dad exercise their faith, and thank God for that. That's not me agreeing with baby baptism. That's me saying that mom and dad have faith. And I thank God that my mom and dad had faith. And I was raised in a house of faith. But I love the saying, God has no grandchildren. God only has children. It's not my mom's faith. It's not my dad's faith. It's my faith. It has to become my faith. And where Isaac thought he gave the blessing, Jacob realized he can't remain the God of Abraham. He can't remain the God of Isaac. He has to be my God. You and I, as Christians, we believe that we are saved by grace. We believe that we are saved by grace through faith. Not mom's faith, not dad's faith, our faith, our personal faith. And where is that faith? Where does that faith go? Have you guys ever heard the analogy of faith as a chair? Have you heard this before? When you go to sit down, you look at the chair and you believe that the chair can support you. You believe that if I put my weight on this chair, it's not going to crash down to the ground. We have to ask a good question. Where do you put your faith? Because if you put your faith in a chair that the legs have been sawed through, what's going to happen? You're going to fall on the ground. But somebody told you a story. Somebody told you that a fellow came along, and that fellow eventually went to the cross, and he died. And they told you that he died in your place. They told you that he died in your place. And one of the great questions then is that true? Is it true? And we have these stories. We have these stories that it happened. Are the stories true? Well, one of the things that Paul says is that when you are in Christ, you become a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. You are no longer Jacob. You no longer can rely on your cunning. You no longer can rely on your trickery. You no longer can rely on Jacob. You have to become a new creation. You have to become Israel after you have strived with God. And after you grab God and you say, I will not let go until you bless me. I will not let go until I am a new creation. I will not let go until I am transformed, when the old is gone and the new has come. We were having this conversation. We were having a talk about people in this country who, they're Christians because they were born in America. Okay. But have you put your faith in the living God? Have you put your faith in the one who died in your place? I told you last week that we don't have a state church and we don't want a state church. Because one of the great questions would be, whose church gets to be the state church? And if it's not my church, well then I'm not going to be terribly happy, huh? Truth. Truth. What is truth? Is truth truth because you believe in it? Is truth true because I told you it? Or is truth true because you have experienced it, you know it? You sat down on the chair and the chair held you up. The church is here. The church exists. The church exists throughout the world to tell everybody the gospel message. Sin separates you from God, but God loved you so much that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not die, but shall have everlasting life. And if you're here this morning and you don't know what I'm talking about, you don't know what it is to be in Christ, don't leave here this morning. I want to talk to you. We're going to have a barbecue, so we're going to have time to talk. If you're watching online and you're wondering, what is this new creation? You can call the church, you can email the church. The church exists to spread the gospel message. Christian, you're already in Christ. You look at a story like this, and a story like this speaks to the power, not of cunning, not of trickery, but the power of God. And the power of what it is to be in relationship with God. You read this story and you realize that like Jacob, you are a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come.
Thank you for joining us today. Please feel free to share the videos in this series with friends and family. Join us next time, and Ozzy will look at God promising Jacob that he would be with him.